Alrighty, so I am back for the second video in this series. I will try to make this a little bit quicker. I know the first one was longer than what I definitely wanted, but this is just quickly how to conduct that visual analysis. So I'll walk you through this slide, and then the third video of the series will actually be practicing and looking at some visuals and looking at some advertisements to get you set up and ready. This one is going to walk you through using the optic and the lens methods, and I'll walk you through what that visual analysis essay would actually look like. So first off, we have to think about what is a visual analysis. And anytime we're analyzing anything, we're taking something apart brick by brick, so to speak. We're looking at it closely and we're really making sense of something using an in-depth study, such as a graph, a chart, a comic, a piece of art, even an advertisement. Because there are so many different ways that people can relay messages to us without just using only words. So, for example, on the bottom left, you have a chart and says the probability of cancer percentage. Then we have the free PSA percentage, and then the blue and red indicate the age of the individual. Right. Um, and so the blue is someone who's 50 to 64 years old. Red is someone 65 to 75 years of age. What we don't understand if we look at the bottom, it says 0 to 10. So this is the free PSA percentage, 10 to 15 PSA, and then the probability of cancers. So we can definitely do an in-depth analysis of this graph, right? We can make assumptions because of what we see here. But when we're looking at this and we're really analyzing something and we're using rhetoric, which that first video broke down, and we're thinking logically, we have to ask ourselves, what pieces of information is it not telling us? What would I need to then do more research on so that I can fully analyze? Right? It doesn't tell me if the study is male versus female, or if it's neutral gender or all genders. It doesn't tell me if this is looking at one socioeconomic status, so one socioeconomic demographic. It doesn't tell me if it's looking at one racial or ethical demographic. It doesn't even tell me if it's looking at people in one part of the region or one part of the continent, or if it's looking at someone globally. And then it's not telling me different probability of cancers because of what. And I would definitely need to know what a PSA is. I would need to know how are they getting this data. I would need to know, are these people who are being assessed by the Cancer Society or by oncologists. There's so much more that I would need to understand before I could fully do that visual analysis. If I look at the middle photograph, the middle image, it's a cartoon. I would kind of want to know what the time period is. And so I could look at it and I could make some assumptions. I see the governor of Hawaii. I'm looking at the clothing. The clothing makes me think 1910s, 1920s. I see on the shoes, these are called spats. And so it's literally like straps under the shoe, and it keeps the shoe clean up here up top, and these things would be laundered. I'm looking at his vest and his bow tie. I also see that it says carpet bag. And so I know that that's definitely a term that was 1910s, 1920s, even into the 1930s. But I don't know who this guy's supposed to be. I'm also questioning, like, why do each of these other gentlemen have tags sticking out from them? And what they say. I need to know, why is he so much larger than everybody else? So lots of questions. But I can certainly analyze. And so when I'm analyzing that, I'm pulling all those things together, and I'm working towards making an assumption. If I look at the image on the far right, excuse me, I'm looking at the image on the far right. I see a lady sitting at a sewing machine. It says Paris 1900. So I definitely have a time period now. Now I know that that's at the turn of the century. I look at her clothing and I look at his clothing, and I think that makes sense. But then I notice that it says a new home or the new home. And then it's showing a French and American flag. And so now I'm putting together pieces of the puzzle that this is a company that is both in France and in America. It's in English and in French. And so I can make some certain assumptions there. I'm doing that in-depth study of each of those images. But when I'm doing that in depth study, I'm learning more about a topic. I'm drawing a conclusion. I'm evaluating an idea, or perhaps I'm even supporting a claim that's unique to me, one that I've made. And so when I'm asking you to do this visual analysis, I'm asking you to find an image. I mean, it can be any image, a piece of artwork, it can be a graph, it can be a chart, it can be a map, it can be a photograph, a political cartoon, um, and look at it, analyze it, break it down, and draw a conclusion based on it that you're then going to support with a claim statement. Right. So if I'm looking at any of those things, I'm looking at what is the photographer saying, or what is that cartoonist saying, or what is the politician who's displaying the graph saying? How do I know that's what they're saying? And what other pieces of information do I need to fully support that conclusion? The easiest way is to use the optic method. This optic method is just simply a tool to help you draw out meaning from every piece of that visual image. Now, it's going to be easy to skip past parts of it, and you might get to the same conclusion if you skip past parts of the optic. But I warn you, I caution you that sometimes in doing so, my students often get to the wrong conclusion, or they're unable to tell me how they got to that conclusion, and they're stuck back at square one. So I really urge you to use this optic method cautiously, and to go by it step by step. So the different pieces of it are the OPTIC. So it's an acronym. The overview. You want to, in one sentence, really quickly write down what you see at one quick glimpse. What are you looking at? After you do that, then you're going to list the parts, not in full sentences, just in bullet points. What do you see in the specific parts? You're not making connections between these things. You're just looking at how the image is arranged. The third thing that you'll notice is that title or that text. If the image has a title, you're going to want to make note of that, because usually our photographers, our cartoonists, or even our artists give us a lot of information just with that one simple title. And oftentimes there might even be text in there that we want to analyze too. And then the fourth step is we're looking at those interrelationships. How does that overview, how do those parts, how does that title or that text work alongside with everything else? What is their relationship? And because of each of those four things, what conclusion can I infer? What conclusion can I make because of what I see? And is that conclusion substantiated by that visual text? Here's what I mean. When we break down and we evaluate, we're going to just quickly say what we see. So let's start with the image on the left. And I simply see um, three children with a horse. One sentence. Then I'm going to sit there and break it down piece by piece. I'm going to list the parts. I see a horse at the top left. I see a small boy in a blue shirt near the horse. I see an older boy in a lighter blue shirt um, standing next to a girl in an orange. I see flowers. I see a brick wall. I see maybe a river, a stream. That's what I'm noticing. Now I'm going to see no title, no text, so I can skip that T. I want to find out the title of this artwork later if I were doing an analysis on it, but that's not pertinent now. But now I'm going to see the interrelationships. So the interrelationships is I notice that the boys' faces and the girl's face looks cautious. I know that one boy is closer to the horse than the other two. I notice that the road or the brick wall or the streams are all made out of mosaic tiles, so the artist used mosaic. I noticed that the horse either looks like a unicorn or has another ear that's oddly placed. The horse is wearing a halter. I noticed maybe there's a tree there. The boy nearest the horse looks like he's offering the horse some grass to eat. So I'm noticing all these things. And then I would make a conclusion because of it. And here's what it looks like in a better detail. So, this is one of my favorite paintings to do this with. When I look at it quickly, at first glance, I see a picture of a lit building on a dark street. One simple sentence. I could even say this seems to be a painting and it looks like it could be old. I could say that too. Both of those are observations, both of those are what I notice about the image. Now I'm going to go into more detail. I'm not making full sentences. I'm slowing down and I'm listing what I see. 4 people, a dark street, a dark building with dark windows. 1 guy is behind the counter. 2 guys are at the counter. 1 girl in a red dress. The name Phillies. Brightly lit building. Guys are wearing hats. 2 coffee or tea urns. I could even continue listing salt and pepper shakers, sugar shakers, coffee mugs, empty bar stools, only 5 cents, a cigar. I could keep listing, but you get the gist. Notice when I'm observing, I make one simple sentence. When I'm listing the parts, I do just that. Nothing is connected. They're all just lists of parts that I see in the image. And then I want to just jot down the title and the text. This is Nighthawks, the title of this painting. And the text that I see is Phillies. I could also include the text I see, only 5 cents. And then there's some writing that is off the screen that I can't see. Now, here's where I start noting the interrelationships. The brightly lit building is across the street from the dark building. 1 guy is sitting by himself. The other guy and girl in red dress are sitting close together. I could make the assumption here too that it looks like the guy and the girl in the red dress might know each other. The guy behind the counter looks as if he works there. I also want to make note that the streets are empty. The shades are partially drawn in the upper windows of the dark building. The perspective is from the outside looking in. Most of the light is coming from within the building, but some lighting is on the outside, so presumably a street light. Again, notice when I made my observation, one simple sentence. When I listed the parts, I didn't make connections between them. I just simply listed what I saw. And then I made note of title and text. And now I started making note of the interrelationships. Here I could note that the title of it, Nighthawks, might be why it's painted at night, and that perhaps the name of the cafe is called Phillies. I could make note of that interrelationship as well. Now, here's where I want to make a conclusion. This is where most of my students struggle. The conclusion that they tend to make about an image typically is too specific to that image. This is similar to a theme statement. If you're writing a theme statement about a text or about a short story or about a poem, you don't want that theme statement to be specific to that poem itself. That writer is not giving us just that poem to look at. In fact, that writer is making a bigger statement about society, about life, about the world in general. So here, I want to make something that's generalized. What message do I think this painter could be showing me because of what I just noted? So, my conclusion statement is that broad thematic statement that could then be supported later by evidence from this painting. So, my conclusion statement that I came up with is it's possible to be with other people and still feel isolated and alone, a feeling made worse in the darkness and emptiness of night. Notice I used isolated, I used alone, I used darkness, I used emptiness, I used night. All of these things that could be supported by the text because the guy's sitting alone, yet he's in the room with other people. It is nighttime. The cafe is relatively empty, empty building. But notice this conclusion is not solely specific to this painting alone, that it could be something that's discussed on a broader scale. So now that I've used optic and I've broken down the overview, the parts, the title text, and the interrelationships, and have drawn a conclusion, I want to put it together using a strategy called RENS. Now, just like optic, RENS is an acronym and it helps you arrange your essay. So you're going to tell me the reasons behind your claim. And then you're going to give me examples from that image that support your observation and evaluation. If you need to include the name of the painter, the artist, the photographer, or cartoonist, please do. In fact, most of the time, this helps with our context or our exigence. If we don't include the name of the creator of this image, usually we miss something that's crucial and important. And is there any data to support your claim? If you're looking at an image such as Ethan, good golly, I can't remember his name, the painter's name of Nighthawks, then we need to know when did he create it? How many people was he actually referencing when he created it? Is there something that we need to know about it? And then what in this image appeals to our senses and how so? Is there a tone or a mood and what causes this? And how does that contribute to your overall conclusion? So here's what all of that would look like. Keep in mind my conclusion. It's possible to be with other people and still feel isolated and alone. That's made worse in the darkness and emptiness of night. And this is what that looks like. So my claim statement is still in the red bubble. Sorry, my claim statement is now at the top right. And now my reason is in the red bubble. How do I know this? What makes me say this? Well, because you can be in the middle of a crowd or a busy city or with a large group of people that you know and still feel alone. I'm sure we've all felt that way sometime before. Examples from the text. For example, when I reflect on the image, I see the one guy sitting by himself and the guy working. The one sitting by himself isn't talking to anyone, and it appears that the guy working is only speaking to them when they are ordering something. In addition to their placement, darkness and nighttime usually symbolize isolation or loneliness. Now, if I were writing a full visual analysis essay, I would want to go into more detail. But for this example, hopefully you get the idea. Now, I do want to include the names. So I want to talk more about the setting and the artist. So the artist is Edward Hopper. Um, he lived in New York, New York, specifically around the Greenwich Avenue or Greenwich Village area. And this was he and his wife. He's the one, the gentleman on the far right, sitting next to the lady in the red dress, and that is his wife, Jo. And apparently, this was one of their favorite hangouts after they would go to the theater late at night. They would be restless and wander the streets of New York and go to Philly's and enjoy a cup of coffee. And so I wouldn't know that if I hadn't done some background, some research, some context, some exigence. And knowing that gives a little bit of connection for your readers. So I'd want to include some pieces about Edward Hopper and his wife Jo and some of their nightlife in New York. And then here's where I would want to pull in some information that I find in my quick research. I might pull in some information about the number of people who report feeling isolated in a large city. Maybe I want to see if I can compare it to depression numbers of large city versus those in a small town. And maybe that connects to the claim statement that I'm making. And then I want to pull in some of the five senses. So I want to see what I can feel because of what I see in the painting. So I'm going to notice the shadows. I'm going to notice the red dress, and notice do shadows and red dress and that white uniform hold any specific symbol or meaning. The dark gray suits. Why are the guys wearing hats inside the building? Why are the windows darker? The shades half drawn. Why is the light shining out rather than shining in? And I notice there is some street light coming out, but it's still all of that meaning that's behind those images. And why did Edward Hopper choose to paint it in that way? So after optic and Rens, we need to really know um, what's going on that influenced that image. So here's where you're really pulling in when you're doing that visual analysis essay, you're really pulling in certain contexts, that exigence of what really caused that image to be published, and how do I know that that's what that author or that creator, that cartoonist is saying? So here are a couple of things, and I'll try to speed this up so I don't bore you. But for example, this one, very popular image. We've seen it before. Hopefully you have. Most likely you have. And so this is called The Migrant Mother. The photographer is Dorothea Lange. This was taken in 1936. And the circumstances that influenced the photographer and the image were the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And so now, if we think about that, how does knowing that information interpret the analysis of the image? Because what we see in front of us is a very forlorn looking woman. She's dirty. She's got three children because she's holding one. We only see the three. She's actually there at a camp, a migratory camp for farmers, and she has seven children. And so we have to do a little bit more background digging. We find out that Dorothea Lange was passing by the tent and just saw the hopelessness and despair. And she actually had to convince this mom to take that image. And she was sending it back to Washington, D.C. to beg for support and government assistance. And it was literally because of this photograph, and I can't say this one photograph because Dorothea Lange took several others, that it actually prompted the government to send hundreds of thousands of dollars to aid, in the forms of money or food or clothing or some type of provisions to help these people who had been pretty much wiped out because of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and were living, literally hand to mouth of whatever they could scrape by and feed. And so if we know this, we can make that conclusion statement based off our analysis, but now we can use all that other information to help really support our conclusion statement. If I'm looking at this image, I notice that there's a woman, holding a flower in the face of guns, right? If I want to list the parts, I notice the bayonets, I notice the men are wearing helmets, I notice she's wearing a watch, I notice she looks peaceful, no one's yelling. I can list all these parts, but I need to know more about it. I would need to know, that the photographer's name, I would need to know in what context. And my friends, this image was taken right here in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. I shouldn't say right here because we're in Texas, but this was taken right here in the United States. And it was taken in our nation's capital, in Washington, D.C., at the height of the Vietnam War. And so she is, a peaceful protester protesting the Vietnam War. She's part of that peace, love, and flower movement. And she actually was going by and putting a flower at the end of every rifle. And those are U.S. military who are holding the bayonets against her. The bayonets are sheathed. I'm sure the weapons were not unloaded, but she was still, at threat. And so we would need to know some more about what caused her to be there, and why was she, stuffing the rifles with flowers. Here are some other things we could analyze. If I were looking at these, I would definitely want to look at proximity to things. I would want to look at the caricatures. I would definitely want to look at when were these created. The one at the top right was 2015. The one at the bottom was 2020. And so I would want to know what's going on in 2015, what's going on in 2020. Who is Gary Varvel? Who is Daryl Cagle? What other images do they create? Um, what platforms do they publish their works in? Because all of that matters. There's some context and exigence, and then I need to make that conclusion of what are they trying to convey, and how do I know? And when I'm doing that research about them, am I finding that, those solutions? Now here I want to draw your attention really quickly to this one, the one on the top right. That's pretty self-explanatory, but the one on the bottom left, most of my students stumble and they get hung up on this one. And so I'm just going to ask you to tap in to what's going on in 2020. And hopefully, one of the things that pops into your mind is COVID, right? And so, President Trump, the previous president, was still in office, and COVID is running rampant across the globe, not just our nation, but across the globe. And the guy on the left, he represents the American people. Sometimes he represents the American people, sometimes he represents the American government. But in this case, it's the government, and he's saying Americans need help. That's Uncle Sam. Notice he's in that red, white, and blue. And if you follow politics at all, then you notice that this, creature right here, this elephant, represents the Republican Party. And if you follow politics, that the donkey would represent the Democratic Party. And so here we go. We have Uncle Sam saying, Americans need help. And the writing just underneath Uncle Sam, sorry about that. The writing just underneath Uncle Sam, it says what Americans are saying. And then it says what the doggy hears. And so if you think about a dog and you think about what a dog does when it's with its owners or when it's on a leash, then it's being followed by commands, right? Or being controlled by commands. And so you have to think, who's that Republican Party commanding, or who is commanding the Republican Party? And so think back to that last video when we talked about a red herring, and where we get one argument that is stifled by bringing up something that's completely, totally unrelated. And so if you think back to 2020, specifically May, June, and July of 2020, when the American people were screaming, we need help, we need support, we can't work, so we can't pay our bills, we're going to get foreclosed on, or we're going to get evicted, our people are dying, we need COVID help, we need relief. The Republican Party brought up that, oh, we need to get Mr. Potato Head out of the kids of, or out of the hands of children, because now he's transgender. Believe it or not, research it, folks, that's what was happening. And they also said, oh no, we need to ban some Dr. Seuss books because he's racist. Oh, what? And so they put that at the forefront of the American mind instead of COVID. And that, my friends, is a red herring. Very well done in this cartoon by Daryl Cagle. If you're interested in doing a political cartoon, I strongly recommend looking at some of Daryl Cagle's, um, because he makes several loud statements like that. And he does use logical fallacies very clearly and openly. Alrighty, so that is that video. Please reach out to me if you have questions, and I'll be right back with some more practice looking at the visual images.